Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, the first of a double bill again. Today, we've got a show later on about the American 1st Division pushing from Omaha Beach to the Comont Gap. Looking forward to that one. But right now, we're back to D-Day again. We're back to the British sector. Paul Johnson, aviation and military historian, joins us once again, this time to talk about the 2nd Battalion Hertfordshire Regiment and number 9 Beach Group on Gold Beach on D-Day. And I'm delighted to bring him in. So good afternoon, Paul. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Paul. I'm fine, thank you. And how are you?
I'm very well. So, for those who don't know, you're from Hertfordshire, so I'm guessing that's how you kind of first discovered this story and wanted to kind of bring it to the attention.
Yeah, I live in Hertfordshire. A lot of my material is Hertfordshire related. And then I got involved, obviously, with the Hearts at War programme and the project. Lots of work on the First World War, and of course, we mustn't forget the Second World War, which, and of course, over the years, researched the 1st Battalion, the 2nd Battalion Hertfordshire Regiment. And so, as a consequence, numerous visits to the Normandy beaches and the surrounding area.
And as we'll find out, beach groups are one of those essential but probably overlooked aspects. Stephen Fisher is watching now, who talked about them on Sword Beach, and it's an area that deserves more attention. So I'll bring up your slides. You're in charge of them. Folks, fire away with questions. I'm assuming some of you will not know much about this subject at all, myself included. Some may know a bit more, but we're going to hand over to Paul to take us through this. And I'm hoping that we'll all get something out of it and learn a little bit more about another piece of the jigsaw puzzle when it comes to the organisation of the beaches on D-Day.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Paul. And certainly it's probably not one of the sexiest aspects of the D-Day and the Normandy operations, but very, very important. But before we begin, I must just say a couple of thank yous to a couple of ladies, Abby Rutland Turner and Debbie Wood, who very kindly have supplied information from their relatives, which is Lance Corporal Walter Charles Day and Private John Arthur Morgan, both who served with Hearts, 2nd Battalion Hearts on D-Day, and also for the Imperial War Museum, who have the diary of Corporal Maurice Warner, which is really detailed, really interesting, and forms obviously part of the presentation. So my thanks really to them for helping to sort of like pad out really what's not, the information that's available. So, and this is from Warner's diary, which, as you can see, details both the Hursley camp in Winchester and the various holding camps, the SS Empire Rapier that they were on the Solent, and then the days that they were, the locations that they were in, and the code names for them, which comes as part of the presentation. So hopefully I'll be able to sort of steer everybody through that. But first of all, of course, about the formation of the 2nd Battalion Hertfordshire Regiment. So they were formed from 2 companies of the 1st Battalion, the Hertfordshire Regiment, early in the war, and men of in the local area, which was Tring and St Albans and sort of South Hertfordshire area. But that was then, of course, like most battalions, it was supplemented with men from all around the country. And their initial home service was mainly in East Anglia, where they were on defence watch, really, and then after that, then they moved on they served in Cornwall and in the southern counties, but a majority of their time was spent in East Anglia on home defence. Really, the war diaries are absolutely crammed with loads of information, which is really, really interesting, and probably make a myriad of programs purely about the war diary and all the various interesting issues that were in it. And I think this week you may have seen on Twitter that I was asking a question about the Bosch bump, which is a type of Bangalore torpedo that I'd not heard of before. And some people very kindly responded with some stuff. And of course, that came from the Hertfordshire Regiment themselves. So most of their war, early part of their war, was spent on home defence. Then, of course, in the summer of 1943, in July of 43, it was decided to form the beach groups in preparation for the invasion of France. Beach groups were not something new. They'd already been used in the Mediterranean in preparation for invasion of the Greek islands. And at that time, they were called beach bricks, which is an unusual title, but of course, it gives you the impression that these people are, it's a holding point on a beach. So they changed their names later, of course, to beach groups. So the Herts were then moved from the Southern Counties, or from East Anglia up to Scotland, where they were trained and formed part of the training for the beach groups. And very interestingly, the commander of 104 sub beach group, which is a chap called Lieutenant Colonel Gilbert, in a post-operation report said that the instructors at Gales suffered from many teething troubles, and it was the first attempt to coordinate beach group training. So nevertheless, it achieved more than was first apparent. The infantry battalions who formed the basis of the beach groups were to a certain extent resentful of their change of role. And in spite of this, numerous weighty exhortations to the contrary, laboured under the apprehension that they were going to be converted to gunners, which obviously they weren't. This psychological outlook was soon overcome, and by the time the beach groups left, they were a coordinated family. The training at Gales had one successful result, which was it turned separate units and sub-units into a beach group. So it was really, and they were only there for a short period. That's the other thing. At Gales, they were only there for a week on the beach, which resembled very much the Normandy beaches in which they were going to land. But of course, it also diverted attention for the Germans that we may be looking to invade Norway, because we were training on the Scottish beaches. The men of the Hertfordshire Regiment were required on at least 4 occasions to wade in from chest-deep water, and they were highly, highly resentful of that fact. But of course, they took part in it, and eventually they formed a really, a fantastic unit, really, which nobody, I say nobody, is overlooked. Their participation in D-Day is certainly overlooked. So there were a number of beach groups formed. So for the invasion, you've got number 5 beach group, which was destined for Sword Beach, with number 6 beach group in support. Then you've got Juno Beach, you've got number 7 and 8 beach groups, and then you've got number 9 and 10 on Gold, with 36 beach brick being the reserve. So that's all the preparation. That was what they were destined for. And the Hertfordshire Regiment were the infantry aspect to number 9 beach group.
And Paul, just to interrupt just briefly, you said this concept had been taken forward from the Mediterranean. Did the kind of the precise role of what a beach group was to be stay consistent, or did its coverage kind of change as the war developed? Because we know as the war went on, in terms of what aspects individual units are involved in doing, sort of changes as they get better at amphibious landings. The beach groups, did they stick to their intended purpose?
They essentially, yes, they did. But of course, they developed, they honed their skills, as it were, as they went along. There's a fantastic post-operational report from Gilbert that really gives a good insight and a lot of criticism around what they did. I mean, not only was there from his perspective too many chiefs, but there were also too many Indians. One of the very things that he said was that on the day of the invasion, there were actually too many personnel on the beach with nothing to do. Now, that really surprised me when I read it. because we get this perspective of all the invading troops, the assault troops steaming up the beach, and we're thinking that everybody on the beach is all participating in the fight to take the beach. But actually, there were a lot of men wandering about with nothing to do. One of these, which was the Royal Engineers port detachments, which they had no equipment when they arrived. And Gilbert's biggest complaint is that they basically moved themselves inland and snatched the very best accommodation that they could find, which really seemed to upset him, because he said these guys have got nothing to do. They're waiting for their equipment to arrive. What on earth are they doing on the beach? Then they go, taking the best billets. So he was pretty upset over that one. But certainly, so with number 9 beach group, and I'm hoping everybody can see this. It's a bit of a busy slide. So all the elements to a beach group are there's an element from the Royal Navy, which is the beach commando. Again, Gilbert criticised beach commando because he said it really wasn't much call for them. That was his view anyway. And a beach signal unit. Again, more criticism later on, certainly, that these units, although they were a cohesive force, were at odds with each other, and that communication should have been purely through the Royal Signals and not through the Royal Signals and the Royal Navy, because it caused a lot of issues. The infantry aspect is the 2nd Battalion The Hertfordshire Regiment, and then there were heavy and light detachments of Royal Artillery. Royal Army Medical Corps. Now, there's got a lot of units there because Gold Beach was the biggest expense of beach, if I remember correctly. They were expecting a large number of casualties, and of course, casualties were much lower. And as a consequence, they put in sufficient Royal Army Medical Corps units to support that. So you've got field dressing stations, sanitary stations, you've got transfusion units, and operation units. Royal Army Ordnance Corps, Pioneer Corps, who did a fantastic job on the day. The REMI, which were there recovering what was called the drowned vehicles, so vehicles that came off of the LCTs, came off the landing ships, came off the Rhino ferries, and just got bogged down, because the beach wasn't all sand. There was clay areas, there were dips, there were all sorts of areas where vehicles got jammed, broke down, and had to be recovered. So the REMI were there with the beach recovery units, and of course the Royal Army Service Corps were there, ensuring that the transport companies were in place and also providing petrol, because Mulberry, in its millions of tons of concrete were being towed over, would not be ready for quite some time, and certainly wouldn't be fully operational for quite some time. So as the assault troops land, so then they've got to be supplied with all sorts of different things. The Royal Engineers, again, with the field companies and the port operating companies, which, as I say, Gilbert felt that they just didn't need to be there on D-Day, but they needed to be there D+1, really. The military police, of course, coordinating traffic. Monty himself said that, that it was their participation in moving the transport, making sure vehicles were going in the right direction, that everybody was guided correctly, was, incalculable, really. And of course, the Royal Air Force, another part of the beach group, would provide, they had a beach flight and also the balloon squadron. So you've got to tow your balloons over, and you've got your balloon winches, which, of course, as you would know, weigh a considerable amount, and these need to be manoeuvred onto the beach, and it really was sort of coordinating chaos. That was their job, because nobody really knew what was going to happen as the assault troops moved into inland. The beaches need to then be turned into a support area. So 104 beach sub area was commanded by Colonel Gilbert, And then there were the assault brigades, which was the 69th, 151st and 231st Infantry Brigades. The 2nd Battalion Hertfordshire Regiment was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Harper, Joe Harper. That's his photograph there on the right. A fairly tough but fair man, it would seem, according to most reports and diaries I've read, and certainly, his men really thought something of him. So, a good commander overall. There's only one issue that comes out of Warner's diary. He claims in his diary that one of his mates had a self-inflicted wound on the night before D-Day. He was taken away and then returned to the transport with his wound. That Gilbert apparently insisted that the man went overseas with this wound. Now, for me, that's a little bit questionable. This guy has entered it in his diary. So, but at the same time, I find it difficult to believe that Gilbert or any commanding officer would force a wounded man into such a vital operation purely to punish the individual. It's questionable for me. However, that's the entry in Warner's diary, and certainly worthy of a little bit more investigation on. I think.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely interesting. The whole issue, and I won't go off in a rabbit hole about self-inflicted wounds, is throughout the whole Normandy campaign, it is an issue, and one that really has not been fully explored, let's say, really. But certainly,
and in Italy as well. I mean, that's sort of an epidemic in Italy and desertion. It's we're challenging that idea of everybody being 100% heroic, and I'm not questioning people who are suffering from PTS, things like that, but it's an unneat aspect of the war that deserves further examination, because this they were all heroes thing is a simplistic and well-intended way of looking at World War II, but it's not that neat. There are all sorts of people in combat who probably shouldn't be there, who need attention, and self-inflicted wounds it's there. You see it in the artillery action reports in America. You see it there in the war diaries. So it deserves, as sort of uncomfortable as it is, it deserves examination.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly some of the Canadian war diaries that I've read refer to self-inflicted wounds quite a lot, really. And I was surprised how many cases there were. And of course, a majority of those wind up in court-martial, which is yet another rabbit hole we don't want to go down.
Yeah, it is.
So for the Royal Navy, the principal beachmaster was this chap, Lieutenant Commander William Frank Newman Gregory Smith, DSO, DSC and Bar, who was, was pretty heroic individual, really. He commanded a number of ships in the Mediterranean on water convoys. Recently, I think in the past few days, there's this photograph on the left here showing Royal Navy beach commandos at Courcelles, and I believe this looks like the same chap who is in the photo on the right. So I think this could be Gregory Smith on the beach at Courcelles, which would be great if we could actually identify it was him. But again, certainly Gilbert's criticism of the beach commandos was that they really weren't necessary, and that the Herts Regiment really were the infantry aspect and could do just as good a job. And why are you wasting probably valuable men who could be used as part of the assault? That, of course, it was certainly his view on it. And so, obviously, prior to arrival on the beaches, the beach group had taken part in several exercises. So you've got exercise Smash 1 to 4, I believe, exercise Cropper, and then of course the much written about exercise Fabius, which was the first full tide, first tide landing on Hayling Island. So that's where so the Herts Regiment and the Beach Group were all involved in that, in making sure that they were fully prepared for their arrival, and under the command, of course, of Gregory Smith as the principal beachmaster, who, despite whatever some people believe, did not have a dog, unlike Colin Maud on Juno. So Gregory Smith didn't have a dog. Certainly, at least one of the Herts veterans believed that there was the chap on their Gold Beach had an Alsatian dog, but there's no evidence of that. There was only really Colin Maud on Juno with with Winston, as we know. So principal beachmaster was Gregory Smith, really responsible for making sure that everything got directed into the right place. Again, hopefully, so this is a reasonably good map showing the arrival of King Red and King Green beaches at Versailles, and where the number 9 beach group were landing, and it was their job to support the assault troops as they poured onto the beach and then into Versailles and the surrounding areas, and a jolly good job they did of it as well, really. Despite Gilbert saying that despite rigorous pruning, there were still people in the early stages with no real job when they landed on the beach. And they were quick to do so. Harper certainly records that they're very swiftly, they were taking foxholes that were close to the beach, were assaulting the nearby defences, and taking prisoners. On the first day, the Herts Regiment were responsible for 750 POWs, which of course all had to be searched and then fed and watered and kept in one location. So the creation of a POW cage on the beach was paramount, really, very, very swiftly. And certainly it was their role to do that, and also to support the assaulting troops and the incoming troops and vehicles. So really, really, it's about a coordinated distribution of men, vehicles, and supplies. A really difficult task, and one that is not very often talked about because it's not sexy. It's
no,
not
but I think also we've got an idea, and it's partly because of Saving Private Ryan and video games and things, that there's more disorganization than organization of beaches, that everybody's in the wrong place, and it's all just people running out of landing craft, not knowing where they are towards the bluffs or the buildings inland. And this kind of show reminds us that there is a lot of structure and organization behind it, as Stephen Fisher reminded us on his show. And yes, of course, things will go wrong and people won't be in the right place and landing craft will arrive behind schedule or ahead of schedule. But I think we are all a little bit led to believe it's a bit just sort of random people running up beaches. And of course, it's far from that.
It's far from that. And also from Gilbert's point of view, what he said was that that with the loading tables, everything was designed around the loading tables. So each LCT, LCA, etc., was to have it. But when it comes to the hard stands, sometimes there was different vehicles in place. So you're waiting to load 5 jeeps onto an LCT or LCA, and suddenly there's half a dozen 1,500 weight trucks because there'd been last minute changes, which really caused quite an issue at the time. And fair play, the organisation managed to still get all those vehicles and men and equipment in the right place at the right time. The coordination is just unbelievable, really, and never to be repeated, really. The one thing that Gilbert did say is that 60 ducks, and he said that the ducks were the best piece of equipment that we had on the beaches at the time. 60 ducks have been set aside to carry anti-tank guns, 15 anti-tank guns for each of the assaulting brigades. But come the day, they'd been replaced by 100 motorcycles and tons and tons of what was called G1098 stores, which are, for everybody's information, wristwatches, binoculars, sleeping bags, all sorts of general stores that weren't really required. Gilbert said we'd been better off with more ammunition on the day than with general supplies. And he was absolutely furious that 30 days after the invasion, some of those supplies were still sitting on the beach, waiting to be collected by the relevant units who knew that those stores were there. So he said, we shorted ourselves of a significant number of anti-tank guns, which would have been really quite useful, more use than wristwatches.
Understatement. And you can never have too many anti-tank guns, can you really? We had a question from Grant about what sort of time or wave would the beach groups have landed?
So elements of the beach groups landed with the assaulting wave, but only a few. Majority landed 45 minutes plus, and certainly from Maurice Warner's view, it took some 2.5 hours to load these LCT and LCI and get it onto the beach. So they weren't on. They were due to leave the assault ships at 8:30. They didn't arrive on the beach until 11 o'clock.
Right. Brilliant.
So
Back to you.
Anyway, so this diary entry really is from the 209th Company of Pioneer Corps, and it really sort of determines or helps explain what was happening. So with your permission, I'll just read it out. So Reveille was at 3 o'clock in the morning. Airborne bombardment of the French coast is visible. The convoy hove to off the French coast at 0400 hours. Assault troops boarded the LCAs and left at 0520. Naval bombardment commenced. Aircraft continually overhead. Convoy sighted to east and west. Assault troops reported ashore at 7:25 and at 7:35, and the first objective gained at 0830. 209 Company transferred to LCTs and then LCAs, and the first sections being due to shore at 0845. The sea was rough and choppy. A wade of about 100 yards through 3 to 4 feet of water was necessary in most cases, though a lot of sections were lucky and only had a few inches of water. Contact with the medical units established and work began, and this really is the essential part, right? So we're digging trenches, collecting casualties, giving first aid, assisting in operating theatre, collecting the dead, shelling still continuing, and some isolated German emplacements were still holding out in the beach area, which is obviously what the Hertfordshire Regiment were attacking at the time. Snipers were active, which is what Harper says, and also Maurice Warner, is that the Herts Regiment were, under attack by snipers and, fighting elements of Germans who were on the beach, who had been left behind effectively. And then the Pioneers, so the tanks and transport were still swarming ashore. German prisoners were passing along the beach in droves. And then towards the evening, the commander of the 104 beach sub-area, which is Gilbert, and the HQ, established an HQ in a nearby shell hole in a minefield, which just, you find it difficult to believe. After removing 30 to 40 mines, it was a bitterly cold night with intermittent dive bombing attacks by the enemy aircraft, one diving to about 200 feet over our shell hole, quite unhealthy, remembering the mines. And that's, it's really indicative of exactly what the Beach Group were going through, exactly what the Herts Regiment were going through. Once they were ashore, they were given all these different tasks to carry out, section by section. And it really vitally important for the support of the assaulting troops that all this stuff was in place. Yes, you need ammunition, yeah, but you need other things too. Certainly, you need food, you need water. Yes, they've got 24-hour rations, but the Royal Engineers were steaming up, were trying to find water points, because you've got thousands of men on the beach who need water, who need supplies. And so the Beach Group were essential. And to protect the Beach Group, the Hertfordshire Regiment were there, but not really participating that much in the fight. So this photograph shows obviously Sherman tanks coming ashore on Gold Beach, and you can see this already in advance. We've got bulldozers on the beach from the beach support groups, preparing tracks and repairing and preparing exits for the tanks, preparing the way forward for all the equipment that was due to arrive, and repairing. I mean, what it's like when a tank passes by. If ever you go to one of these shows and you see a tank, it chews up the ground. So suddenly you've got hundreds of tanks arriving. So there's a constant need to repair those roads, those tracks, and those surfaces to keep the traffic moving. Vitally important. And also the photograph gives a good indication of the loading tables with each LCT, LCA, LCI being numbered, and with their relevant numbers for troops to join. You're on this one, you're on this one, you're on this one. The organisational aspect to it is unbelievable, and certainly really undefinable, really, from my point of view, certainly. And I'm sure that most people would share that view and opinion. Anyway, so this map, this comes from the war diary of the Herts Regiment, really. So you'll see down in the bottom left corner is Alberta. So that's the beachfront of King Beach. And then you've got Derna, that's Versailles itself, and Regina, which is, all of these are referred to by Maurice Warner in his diary. Regina is the village of Crepon, which, as we know, was assaulted by the Green Howards. And of course, there's the Green Howards Memorial was there. And a very interesting entry in Warner's diary is that when they were marching up through Versailles and moving on to Crepon in the coming days, they would see graves of both German and British soldiers by the roadside. But on their return, a few days later, those graves had been marked with crosses, and then the names of the individuals identified. And it's quite a poignant entry in his diary that, seeing these isolated graves, really, of men who were part of the assault force, really seems to have stuck in his mind. And he certainly commented on the capability of the assault troops, because what he said was there is with all the chaps, he noticed a different atmosphere amongst the assault troops in comparison to the support troops. He said they look hard and tough. Most are small but sturdily built fellows from Yorkshire, and the nasty customers, no doubt, in a scrap. Much beer is being drunk with them, and all are becoming very hilarious. So these are, he's describing the assault troops really as a bunch of pretty tough characters who he was there to support them, as was Walter Gray and John Morgan. So we're looking now, of course, at King Red, King Green. This is the primary area where the initial arrival of material would go to, and then it would move on into the assembly areas, which were just slightly further inland. And you can see that where it says assembly area. And there were then there's a little bit of a better map that we'll get to shortly, which is this one. So this one is slightly more detailed. I've highlighted this where it says TVTA, which is the tracked vehicle transmission area. There was also wheeled vehicle transmission area and the PTA personnel transmission area, where men would be moved to in readiness to support the assault groups and replacing casualties. The Remia would have their own area around the village of Sumer. There was various different parks, petrol storage, ordnance storage, all kept separate. There was a POW cage, and then, of course, there was a burial area just outside of the village. Burials seem to have occurred in Grey-sur-Mer, further along to the east, and certainly in the surrounding area. Interesting that there were some burials, it would seem, opposite Vers-sur-Mer church in the field there that Warner later described. But those men, of course, in subsequent months were removed and concentrated into Bayeux. This photograph, so you see where I've highlighted the tracked vehicle transmission area. So this photograph, I believe, is of the same area, looking down onto King Beach. And also you can see there are tracked vehicles there, stores all over the place, which of course had to be brought ashore, rapidly moved into the transmission area. In particular, and it's difficult to see, but there are jerry cans all on the floor, so petrol had to be brought in. There was no Pluto at that point. You and I would know, or I'm sure people watching would know, that tanks consume an enormous amount of fuel that needs to be replaced rapidly. It's brought in by jerry cans, which were produced in their millions, and a great many then transported, obviously, across onto the beaches, using rhino ferries, which are a flat bottom ferry or flat bottom boat. Gilbert was pretty critical of the rhino ferries. He felt that they were uncontrollable and were in fact a hazard in his eyes to the whole operation. I'm not a rhino ferry expert of any description, so I couldn't possibly say, but certainly it would seem that flat bottom boats in a choppy sea loaded with material were not the best thing that could have been used. And of course, some struck mines and were lost casualties as a consequence of that. Anyway, so the Hertfordshire Regiment not really involved in too much action, but they were involved in one significant action on the day, which is happened later in the evening when they were basically being assaulted, or the lateral road was being assaulted by German mortars and gunfire from a ridge that is called Le Buisson, which I believe translates to the bush, which is just outside of Vers-sur-Mer. And so this is the assault map for the time. So you can see where it says La Rivière. There is a lateral road there. So that was coming under fire from these weapons at Le Buisson. And where I'm not sure, can you see my mouse?
No, we can't. No, unfortunately. No.
Okay, that's fine. So there's just over to, you can see a dotted line over to the left of the screen, and it's on this road that the Second Hearts sent a patrol under the command of Lieutenant Frederick Bonney. Bonnie discovered that, well, first of all, the patrol came under heavy fire, and certainly there's a report in the 8th King's War Diary that says that they went to assist the patrol. Unfortunately, the mortar and machine gun fire caused 3 casualties amongst the Hertfordshire men. And Bonnie decided he was going to try and they'd been left behind, and he was going to try and retrieve them. So he and Corporal Church crawled down the road in an effort to recover them. Interestingly, the recommendation for Church, Arthur Church, was that he proceeded up a road which was under machine gun and mortar fire to rescue a wounded private. And that Church carried this man on his back and crawled down the road on his stomach under heavy fire. So pretty, so he got an immediate military medal for his actions, and Bonnie got an immediate award of the Military Cross also for his actions. And so, that's really the main action that they got involved in, with the Germans on the day, remembering that the Hertfordshire Regiment remained in the beach area. They were only in existence for a short while, as was the beach group. So this, interestingly, is what Gilbert said in his report about the beach group weapons. The beach group should have been allowed to bring in at least 4 3-inch mortars for each infantry battalion and their peers. They didn't bring them in. If the group is on an open flank, such as the Hertfordshire's, it should also bring in its anti-tank guns in time to be in position by nightfall. Many small pockets of enemy resistance were left in the BMA, which is the beach maintenance area. Some of them quite strong points, which beach groups had to clear up. Supporting fire could not, of course, be spared from the main assault, and they had to be taken with rifle, bren and bayonet, with consequent disproportionate casualties. 3-inch mortars would have been invaluable. A really good comment from Gilbert, and a criticism to say, we don't need wristwatches, we don't need sleeping bags, but we really needed assault guns, anti-tank guns. We needed 3-inch mortars, and we needed the ammunition to go with it. Don't need a wristwatch. Thanks very much. So quite critical, really, in his later report. Of course. And this is always, if ever I'm on tour, this is really an important, interesting point, which is that every soldier, on average, produces 2.1 pounds of human waste a day. Now, that means that on King Red Beach, there was approximately each day about 4 tons of human waste.
And this is the sort of detail you only get on World War II TV. We did VD casualties to the South African 6th Armored Division in Italy based on unit, and now we're doing the amount of shit per beach per unit. I mean, this is the kind of stuff they don't do on the big mainstream TV.
Definitely not. The point to that is, when we visit these beach areas and we talk about the assaults, we talk about the men, the casualties, talk about all these different things. We talk about the units, and we can tell you about those things. We can tell you about the sounds that were being heard, but we can't describe the smell that was taking place at the time. And it's always an interesting point from my point of view, really. Because you've got cordite, you've got smoke, you've got things burning, you've got goodness knows what going on, and here we are, and of course, every soldier needs to go at some point during the day. And whether it's, and I'll get to that in the next slide, but certainly the anticipation was diseases that were to be encountered were enteric fever, which they said were endemic. There was food poisoning. Gastric enteritis also occurs. So what you don't really need is troops with gastroenteritis. reported epidemics of respiratory diseases and many other pulmonary tuberculosis in the civilian population, infective hepatitis, all sorts of different stuff. And of course, the claim that venereal disease is widespread. Quite how true that is, maybe that's a false report just to put people off, because I'm not sure. I'm sure it was a problem. How significant, I don't know. But of course, as you can see from the slide, venereal disease will be combated by the early provision of unit packs and the issue of condoms to troops, really. So perhaps not something that we always consider when we're talking about D-Day. Is how many condoms did you have in your pack, Grandad? Not something that we considered. And as a consequence, so sanitation of the beaches, this will be a primitive in the beginning, and the beach will become fouled. The fouling will be kept to a minimum by cat sanitation. So each man covering his excreta with earth. In selected areas, which later will become sites for latrines. Certainly, and then of course it goes on to say that later shallow trenches or the latrines will be built. But of course, someone had to do this. So what did you do in the war, Grandad? Well, what did you do on D-Day? Well, I don't like to say, son, but actually, yes, I dug a latrine. Someone had to do it. It had to be there. All these things must be provided because at the end of the day, by D+41, the beach group had shifted 242,825 men through the group. Now that's a significant amount of men, and of course they all need to be catered for around latrines, as well as being supplied with food and medical aid. And all the other support that's required for these guys, provision of tents, provision of shelter of some sort. Yes, slit trenches were dug, but there were also, for those people who were working and living in the beach area, they can't live in a slit trench night and day. They can for a short period, and it can be covered up. But of course, they can also at the same time. We need to provide them some shelter if we can. Anyway, so this photograph here, just briefly, the shoulder titles, I believe, say Hertfordshire, and you can see the beach group insignia on their shoulders. And if you study Beach D-Day a little bit closer, look at the images, look at the videos or the film from the period, you'll be surprised how often you see that insignia. It pops up all the time. The guys are on the right of the photograph, of course. This is King Beach, and more likely Hertfordshire guys who are moving some material around. And of course, we've got the balloons in the background from the 98th Balloon Squadron, who's really, it was really important. And again, I really wasn't aware of how much the Luftwaffe was attacking the beaches in the days after D-Day. Night attacks were every night, which when I read it, I was quite surprised about, really. I didn't really take the Luftwaffe as being a particularly worthy fighting force at that time, but obviously they were. And so as a consequence, we certainly would see that they were. Anyway, so John Morgan said that on D+3 we had two jobs to do that will always stick in my memory. A special area for the dead men had been set aside on the beach, and we were ordered to clear that area of mines. I shall never forget the scene. There were more than 1,000 bodies neatly laid out in rows. Walking amongst those rows were the padres, who had sometimes the distressing task of cutting one identity disc from each body so that they might notify the next of kin. The other task we frequently had to do was to burn piles of dead cattle, normally seen to be littered with these unfortunate bloated animals with their legs sticking in the air, most of them killed by shell fire or bombing. Yes, and we've all seen that. I mean, we've seen the scenes in movies like, Private Ryan, where we see, dead cattle around. Yes, somebody had to dispose of those. And I'm sure that some were wound up as food of some sort, and others were just simply burned. But it's stuck in John Morgan's mind, certainly, as being one of those very difficult and memorable tasks that they went through. So later on, this is from a war diary, from the Hertfordshire War Diary. So a little bit more detailed, really, and it just shows the widespread of the sub-area group. So, we're landing on King Red and King Green. The little highlighted area at the top is where the initial stores were landed, and then they were moved into these different areas. So you've got a tracked vehicle transmission area, wheeled vehicle transmission area, petrol being stored, ordnance, vehicle dispersal areas, ammunition being stored, moving widespread across the area over a series, over the coming days, really. And of course, all the traffic that goes with it, ducks transporting stuff in, 1,500 weight, 3-ton vehicles that are moving stores around. Everybody had to be directed. Gilbert said that there were far too many signs created, because not only were the Corps of Military Police putting up signs, but individual units were putting up signs. And he said that some drivers had to spend several minutes reading all the signs that have been in place, and then were no better off, really, for all the information that had been provided to them. Just still didn't know where to go. So another lesson from his point of view, just, you need one group of people creating signs and one set of signs, really.
Yeah.
You don't need...
Just to jump in, we've just had the anniversary with an extra 3 million people, they're now saying, in Normandy, and perhaps inland from some of the beaches you have better road networks than other, but inland from Gold Beach you rapidly get to those pretty narrow roads going through places like Ree and Crepon and Bazonville, and where I couldn't imagine taking some of the bigger size vehicles up there and getting them around corners. So you've got to make sure which is the route you go up, so that a Jeep can go up kind of any old lane. But so it's a reminder of just how complicated that task is. That the beach represents one problem, and then inland you've got to deal with the existing road network.
Absolutely. And also, when you read through the war diaries for the relevant units, and of course, because of the relevant units, there are numerous war diaries. They were not only maintaining and repairing existing roads, but they were building new ones. They were also, digging trenches, creating drainage facilities, because the area was marshy and it needed to be drained. All this work fell to the men of the beach group. Equally, and when we see some, often we see photographs of German prisoners of war burying British dead. But it wasn't really the case. It certainly it took place from time to time. In the main, the burial of the dead was undertaken by the Pioneer Corps, who done a majority of the work, really, and they mentioned that in their war diaries. In how many men were used for digging graves, and in the temporary burial of men, which of course were then later removed and concentrated into the CWGC cemeteries. But so, over a very wide area. As Gilbert said, the duck, as can be seen here, was invaluable from his point of view. Really, I think the maximum it could take was 10 tons of equipment, men and equipment, from what I read. And certainly, he said that they were very versatile, a piece of equipment. Really, really, the only lesson that they learnt during their training was that they had to drive forward from the LCTs into the sea. They couldn't. They did try some trials reversing into the water, but it would seem that then caused flooding of the duck, which would then obviously mean the loss of a duck. But really, really quite invaluable. In total, the beach group by D+41 had moved 58,720 vehicles and 148,000 tons of stores and equipment onto the beaches. So which is a fantastic achievement. Really, they rescued or removed 3,402 casualties, and plus, of course, POWs, which was 750 on D+1, but increased every day until they were shifting something in the regions. I think by the end of by D+41, it's around about 4,000 prisoners at least had gone through that particular beach group or subgroup. So you can multiply that by the other groups, so you can see what a sort of monumental task it was, really moving these.
And it's a reminder, Paul, of just James Holland coined the phrase "the big war" the Allies are bringing to bear, and by the time the Allies really start smashing out of Normandy, come late July, early August, they've got that massive resource of stuff. They've just got the ammunition and the fuel and the infrastructure there to do that, and the Third Reich at this point can only dream of having the quantity of stuff. So when people are talking about, the Allies are a bit slow to push inland, they've got to build up this massive, great arsenal so that when they do, they can go at full pelt. And now we can kind of understand why when, you get to Belgium by, Paris by August 24th, after 3 or 4 days after Falaise Gap is closed, Belgium a few days later, that's all because of this, goes back to this huge, great tale that has been steadily come ashore, as you've been explaining so well, since June the 6th. And you're talking about just one of the beaches. That's the remarkable thing. We're not even getting into the Mulberry Harbour particularly, or the other 4 beaches. It's extraordinary the amount of stuff the Allies are bringing in.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And of course, Mulberry wasn't ready, so therefore this stuff had to come through directly onto the beaches. Pluto wasn't ready. These things, of course, they were created, they were put in place, but not until a little bit later. In the meantime, all this men and material, vehicles, everything, including 6 tons of coal, apparently, were shifted through the beach. Now, quite why you'd want to shift 6 tons of coal onto the beach, I've got no idea. There's no real explanation for that. It's within the sub beach group records. We shifted 6 tons of coal. Well, great, but what for? It was coal not available in France. I'm guessing that it probably was, and quite what it was used for, there's no real explanation. But again, it's more material that had to be brought by ship and then shifted, onto the beaches.
Mm.
So of course, and certainly, so through June and into July, this was what they were doing virtually every day. So they were supporting the arrival of men, equipment, vehicles. So an entry in the war diary for the 14th of July from the Herts is also mirrored in Warner's diary, where he said that it's in honour of the French National Day, which is Bastille Day, 14th of July, as you would know. The Second Herts provided a guard of honour from S Company, that support company, which together provided by the Royal Marines, which he was quite proud that the Herts and the Royal Marines not only were at the War Memorial, but the local inhabitants turned out, smartly dressed, and that they were headed by the tricolour standards, borne by French ex-servicemen in uniform. They all moved to the War Memorial, and then afterwards, there was an address by Colonel Gilbert, who was commanding the beach sub area, and then of course they marched off to the nearby war cemetery, which we talked about earlier, which was opposite the Hertfordshire Church. And this really is a slight. So the photograph on the right is actually from Corsair's on the day. So it was on the 14th of July 1944, but it mirrors exactly what was going on in Hertfordshire, which of course you can see that the top photograph is how you find it today, and the bottom one is the then and now comparison from between the wars. So not much change today, and you can imagine if you're there today, and it's great to visit the area, particularly with the Hertfordshire Memorial and the Normandy Memorial. Is you can feel the pride really from Warner and the men and Walter Gray, John Morgan from the Hertfordshire Regiment are taking part in this parade, which had not taken place, of course, since 1939. The Germans wouldn't allow it. And now here they were all turning out. So the children were all smartly dressed, veterans turning up in their uniforms, and everybody singing the La Marseillaise. So it was a really quite a poignant moment for the regiment and for the village, and of course. But there's an irony, because on the 14th of July, that's the day that Monty writes to Joe Harper saying, "Sorry, Joe," and he also wrote to 12 other battalions at the same time, "there's a need to break up your battalion in order to reinforce the assaulting troops," which is exactly what happened. So, Monty said that you're going to try and break them up, platoon by platoon, which is invariably what took place. Walter Gray went off to serve with the Royal Warwickshires, and he was wounded a few weeks later by a bullet in the throat or in the neck, and that was the end of his war, really. But he really didn't realise how badly wounded he was, but he survived. That was in an assault by German paratroopers. John Morgan went off to serve with Number 3 Commando, and Maurice Warner went off to serve with the Somerset Light Infantry. So the battalions, were broken up. The Hearts were broken up. The beach groups were broken up from the middle of July, and finally were finished on the 23rd of August, as of course the Normandy campaign came to an end, and they moved off, as you say, to take Paris and Belgium, and of course the Canadians start capturing the seaports, which were of vital importance really at the time. And so at the end of July, the Second Hearts were to suffer 2 more casualties. They'd not suffered very many. The Second Hearts lost a pioneer platoon sergeant and 1 pioneer during the mine lifting operations, and the Royal Engineers Field Company had also had several casualties. And more interestingly, Gilbert says all minefields were marked with boards until the American sailors removed them as souvenirs, and from then on, casualties to men and vehicles increased. So here were the American sailors arriving, with the landing craft, seeing these signs, these beware mines, snatching them as souvenirs. As a consequence, there were subsequent casualties to men and vehicles, which is just really, quite distressing, really, in some ways.
Of all the things to pick up as a souvenir, a warning sign to other people seems a bit of an odd choice. But yeah, it's
it does. It certainly does. But of course, that's people for you, and it, perhaps especially young men at the time, you're going to grab that as a souvenir, not really thinking, what the consequence of their action is. But Gilbert again commented on that. So for the Hertfordshire Regiment, not very many casualties. Reg Dickerson unfortunately drowned, leaving his LCI on the 6th of June, and then Lance Corporal John Wolfenden, Private Albert Barber, and Private Ernest Benson were the guys who were unfortunately killed at La Boisson. Lance Sergeant Francis James Alexander, who was a Hertfordshire man, he died from his wounds on the 7th of June. Lieutenant Andrew Cranston was wounded in mine lifting and died of his injuries. And then the Pioneer Sergeant is Frederick Knight and George Whaley from Luton. So those are the Hertfordshire casualties for the period. Obviously, I remember you talking to Stephen Fisher about how many casualties there actually were on D-Day, and still there's some debate as to the exact number. But those are definitely the Herts guys. There were a couple of officers who also lost, Hertfordshire officers, but they were serving with other units at the time. But their parent unit was the Hertfordshire Regiment. And so we come to Hertfordshire Corner. With this photograph on the left, shows Joe Harper unveiling a memorial to the Hertfordshires in 1947. A great event, it would seem, and certainly, the memorial still stands today to the officers and men who arrived in King Sector on Red and Green Beach. And it's a great place to visit because obviously there's much to see in that vicinity, particularly the sexton from the 86th Field Regiment, which is across the way, as you would know.
Yeah.
Of course, Vers-sur-Mer now has the wonderful Normandy Memorial standing in place, pretty much where the photograph that we had showed earlier, showing the wheeled vehicle transition area. So it's pretty much in a location that was very much used by Number 9 Beach Group at the time for the storage of vehicles and equipment. So it's a little bit of an added interest really to anybody who's visiting it. And if you are, then if you haven't, I suggest you do, because it's a wonderful thing. Although there's been a bit of controversy at times, but certainly I think it's wonderful.
I'd rather it be there and then kind of pick little faults with it than it not be there. And it's just, for me, as I've said a couple of times, it's just, I wish they would explain a little bit about how they define their parameters of who is and who isn't on the monument, and just have some kind of all-encompassing phrase saying men died before the dates on the monuments and men died after dates, but they're all part of the Normandy, the Normandy fallen, and that would make me completely happy. But I'm glad there's now a central place to go for people who want to understand the British contribution, and that's what it is.
Yeah, definitely, I would totally agree. And obviously it's in a great place. But here's a little bit more information about the location, really.
Yeah.
If you want to know more, of course, about the beach groups, then I thoroughly recommend these two books, which is The Beach Groups of Normandy by Bridget Pollard and D-Day Beach Force by Joseph and David Rogers. And really, the subheading of the book there, The Men Who Turned Chaos into Order, says it all. Says it all about the Hertfordshire Regiment, says it all about Number 9 Beach Group and about 104 Sub Beach Group, because that's exactly what they did. They turned the chaos of what could have been a chaotic event into order by making sure that everything was organised, making sure people and vehicles were in the right place, that supplies and were in the right place, and really, without them, there would not have been. I believe anyway, there would not have been a successful invasion of Europe.
Well, fantastic stuff, Paul, and I think you've shone a really big, strong light on this story here, and I think I'm going to ask my last question for you. Really, is about: would you now suggest that Gold is the least talked about beach? I mean, I used to think it was Juno, but thanks to works of Ted Barris and Mark Zelkin, all these other guys, I think Juno has has moved up a rung or two. Stephen Fisher, of course, has given a spotlight to sword, and we don't know where he's going to go next. Maybe it'll be gold, maybe it will somewhere else. But I think gold has possibly dropped to number 5 of the beaches. Obviously, Omaha's number 1, and there's no shifting Omaha from number 1. But gold kind of gets talked about, but only in regards to Arromanches. So would you agree with me that it's probably dropped to number 5?
Oh, without a doubt, because obviously, unfortunately, people were consumed with combat units or consumed with casualties, and you'll find that Gold Beach, yes, troops arrived, they landed, they moved inland fairly quickly. Casualties were light, to the point where Gilbert said that, unfortunately, there were too many men around at the time, because not only were they expecting more casualties, but all of a sudden they found themselves with a load more mouths to feed, which was unexpected, really. And so as a consequence, it's not much talked about really, because the invasion arrived fairly quickly, moved inland, and then it was left to the far less interesting support groups to start bringing men and equipment and stores ashore. But if it wasn't for them, and if it wasn't their actions, and it wasn't for the fact that they were there taking part and organising things, then we may well have seen a different outcome. God forbid that D-Day had turned into another Dieppe.
Well, exactly, and I think the point is that organization, we said it right at the beginning, isn't very sexy. Things being well oiled and well organized and well run, and that we've when staff rides and battle tours come here, there's this sort of emphasis on the bravery of individual small unit actions, and this sergeant here and this corporal here and this lieutenant or lieutenant here and there doing this, and overcoming the hurdles and the lost groups of paratroopers and people in the wrong place overcoming adversity. And these are great lessons for leadership. They're great to motivate people and get them interested in that sacrifice individuals made. But behind that, as we've learned from Jeff McGovern a couple of nights ago, and Dilip with his 11 group bunkers talk yesterday, there is this really, really solid, well-planned, well-executed, business-like almost. It's that mid-management aspect that really isn't sexy, but it's so absolutely vital. We talk about the leaders at the top because the personality. We talk about the guys at the bottom, but this is management, is it? This is supervisory roles, and it's just not sexy.
No, absolutely, couldn't agree more. It's not sexy, and yes, it's probably not interesting, really, from many people's perspective, because it doesn't involve, fighting the 12th SS, and it doesn't involve combat of any description. It just involves men doing their job, bringing in troops, vehicles, and equipment to support what's going on, and to push the invasion forward. And without that, there would be no invasion.
Yeah, and it's a lesson for us all as well, to, as much as it can be very exciting to meet fighter pilots and commandos and paratroopers, is that when you meet a guy who was perhaps responsible for covering up and burning and getting rid of the dead cows or the shit that accumulated on the Gold Beach, it's all part of the process. It's all part of the mechanism that brought the liberation to the Europe. And just because someone isn't a commando or a fighter pilot doesn't mean they're not worthy of our praise and gratitude and thank you. And not everybody can get the goal, the hat trick that wins the FA Cup final. That's what the story has been today. So, Paul, it's been absolutely remarkable talking to you. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable presentation. Everybody watching has learnt lots. Some great questions in the sidebar, but I'll invite you back at some point in the future. But in a few hours' time, we have Greg coming on to talk about the first US division pushing inland from Omaha towards Comore and San Lo. So that'll be great later on this afternoon. As always, click, like, and subscribe. Do all the work there. Consider becoming a patron. Buy the books of my guests. Paul's books are listed below. A couple of them are listed below. So there's a Plot of Shame one, and there's a Brookwood one. So they're not about this subject, but they're definitely worth adding to your library. And I will see you all, folks, in a few hours' time. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.